Hello, I'm Mark Payne. Welcome to History Alive. History Alive is a program of the West Virginia Humanities Council that brings historical figures to life through portrayals by presenters who have conducted thorough research into their character. These presentations are both entertaining and educational. The Humanities Council makes these characters available to nonprofit organizations across West Virginia such as schools, libraries, historical societies, and a wide range of civic groups. The presentation fee is paid by the council, and we ask only that their travel costs be covered by the host group. History Alive is designed as an interactive experience between the character and the audience. We encourage your organization or school to host a presentation and bring a figure from history for a visit with your audience or students. Having someone like Booker T. Washington, Mad Ann Bailey, or Chief Cornstalk come to speak to your group can breathe life into these historical figures and make them more real. Nothing compares to the live in-person visit. Each presentation consists of 3 parts: a monologue, a question-answer session with the character, and then the presenter breaks character to answer questions about how he or she conducted their research. The presenters on our History Live roster have researched a variety of sources such as diaries, journals, letters, official documents, autobiographies, and the research of other scholars in developing their character. A History Live presentation is not a play. It's an audience participation event that relies on interaction between the audience and the character. Being able to ask your own questions of these important figures from the past is a unique experience. It's difficult to reproduce the feel of an actual History Live presentation here in the studio. Without an audience to ask questions, we will change the format a bit and have our guests sit with me for a few minutes and a few questions after the monologue. But we hope to give a sample of how a History Live presentation can add to the offerings at your school or organization. There will be information on the screen at the end of this program for how to contact the Humanities Council about bringing a History Live character to your community. At this time, I would like to welcome today's guest from history. We are pleased to have with us in the studio the Sultan of SWAT, George Herman Ruth.
It wasn't easy growing up a young boy in Baltimore, but I was a bad kid. Oh, it was a rough, tough neighborhood, but I liked it. I hated school and despised and loathed the coppers. I'm not saying that with any great sense of pride. I'm saying it because I feel that it must be said. Because my one hope is to help some young boy who might be standing today where I stood then. And I wasn't raised in an orphanage like those newspaper fellas like to write. It was St. Mary's Industrial School for Boys. Well, that's where they sent you if you were ruled and incorrigible. I was sent there at the age of 7. Well, I guess drinking and smoking at that age will brand you an incorrigible. It was there that I met the greatest man I've ever known, Brother Matthias of the Xaverian Order, a Catholic order. Now, the brothers worked with disadvantaged boys, both here and in Europe. Brother Matthias was the greatest man I've ever known. Oh, he stood 6'5" and weighed 250 pounds. But he seldom raised his voice, which was something entirely new to me. Even though, when he spoke, we understood that he meant business. Oh, we weren't afraid of him. It's just that he had a way to gain our respect and our love. When I first appeared at St. Mary's, Brother Matthias took me under his wing. Well, it wasn't that I became his pet. Well, I think that he knew I needed the attention the most. It was Brother Matthias who first saw that I had a talent for throwing and catching a baseball. I became a hitter the first time I saw him hit the baseball. Well, he'd stand at one end of the yard with a finger mitt on his left hand and holding a bat in his right. He'd throw that ball up and give it a mighty whack with a bat that he held in his right hand. Well, in those days, the ball was a little bit more than mush. And by the time it got to St. Mary's, it was much worse. Sometimes, when he felt like it, He hit the ball a little harder and knocked it over the fence. Well, that ball had to travel 353 feet, which was quite a wallop in those days. It'd be even quite a poke today when the manufacturers bring the whole rabbit into the ball. Brother Matthias was my hero. After I saw him bat, I tried to do everything just like him. Well, I even used his toed-in method, which I still use today. Brother Matthias not only taught me how to read and write, but he taught me right from wrong. When I first started playing baseball, I thought that I wanted to be a catcher. Oh, I played the other positions, but catcher was my favorite. Brother Matthias and the others tried to convince me that a left-handed catcher just didn't make sense. It was Brother Matthias that turned me into a pitcher. I was 17 years old. Well, actually, he did it to bring me down a notch. You see, we were playing this other school, and the pitcher out on the mound was getting knocked all over the lot. Well, this kept on happening, and after a while, it started striking me as kind of funny. Well, when our last pitcher got knocked out of the box, I couldn't hold back any longer. I just burst out laughing. Well, Brother Matthias came running out of the dugout towards the catcher's box and said, "What are you laughing at, George? What's so funny?" Well, I said, "That guy standing out there on the mound." And I doubled over with laughter. Brother Matthias just stood there and didn't say anything and just looked at me. Well, after a while, he said, "Well, all right, George, you pitch." Well, I stopped laughing. "Well, I've never pitched before," I said. "I don't know anything about it." He said, "You must know something. You know that your friend out there isn't any good. So you go out there and show him how it's done." Well, I knew he was serious. So I traded in my catcher's glove for a finger mitt and headed out to the mound. Well, I'd never been on a mound before, and I didn't have the first idea about how to pitch. But you know, something strange happened when I got out there. Well, it seemed like I was born to pitch. And after a while, I had no problem getting the ball over the plate and striking batters out. I even started trying to throw a curveball, and, well, in kid-like, I stuck out my tongue in the corner of my mouth. Well, that's a habit that stayed with me until my first big league manager, Bill Kerrigan, convinced me that I was telegraphing my curve just by sticking out my tongue. Well, after that, Brother Matthias never let me get too far away from the mound. I'll always think that Brother Matthias was the father figure I needed. Now, I've understood that most fellows who go to school in the manner that I did, later on in life, either refuse to talk about it or put it down, but, well, I'm as proud of St. Mary's as any Harvard man is as proud of his school. And if you allow me to get crude for a moment, I'll pop anybody in the beezer who speaks up against it. When I graduated from St. Mary's, tailoring was to be my trade, but baseball won out. Jack Dunn of the minor league Baltimore Orioles asked me if I wanted to sign a contract. And then he started talking about money. I said, "You're going to pay me to play baseball?" $600 a year, he said. Why, that was more money than I thought there was in the whole world at the time. Well, since I was sentenced, or I was put in, to St. Mary's until I was 21, Mr. Dunn had to become my guardian, so I couldn't leave the school until late February that year. When we arrived at the train station, most of the older players didn't talk to me, which was all right. You see, I was going on my first train ride, and this was going to be the first time that I'd ever been out of Baltimore. I didn't sleep that night, wondering about what was going to happen in the morning and what was going to happen the rest of my life. Well, there was another reason that I didn't sleep. You see, one of the old-timers pulled the oldest trick in the book on me. You remember how they had those little hammocks in the sleeping cars for you to put your clothes? Well, he convinced me they put it in there so that I could rest my arm overnight. Well, when that train pulled into the station the next morning, the Baltimore Orioles had their first injury of the year. A rookie by the name of Ruth had a sore and stiff arm from giving it so much care. When we got off at the train in Fayetteville, North Carolina, I realized it was much warmer there than in Baltimore. Well, I guess I should have studied my geography more in school. Dunn came over to me and said, "Hey, kid, since you're not going to be getting any of your money until after the season starts, I'm going to give you an advance of $5. Why, that was more money than I'd had in my pocket at one time in my entire life. Oh, and things just kept on getting better. That morning when we were sitting down in the restaurant and going over the menu, one of the players leaned over to me and said, "Hey, kid, order what you like. The team picks up your feed bill while you're in spring training." You mean I can order whatever I like and I don't have to pay for it? Well, I was on my third stack of wheat cakes and my third slab of ham when I noticed the rest of the players were just looking at me. George Pippin, a newspaper writer from the Baltimore Sun, said, "If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't believe it." Well, I said, "A fella has to be strong to play baseball, doesn't he?" Well, later on, when Dunn came by, he saw the ruins and said, "Hey, George, there are 27 other guys on this team. Save some for them, will you?" Well, I got the nickname Babe early in those days. Well, it seems like Dunn was always bringing in young players and trying to develop them. Well, that morning, he had to lead me from the clubhouse to the pitcher's mound. Well, I was so proud of that Orioles uniform. I was as proud of that as I was my first pair of pants. All the players said, "Well, look, here comes Dunn and his new Babe." Well, that started it, I guess. But the real clincher came later. Oh, it got to be quite a joke how I walked around starry-eyed all the time. Well, I'd even get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go down to the train station just to see the trains come in. But you can bet I was always back in time to be the first in line when the restaurant opened. Up until that time, I had never seen much mechanization. But the elevator at the hotel was one of the most wonderful machines I've ever seen. Oh, I'd stand there gawking for hours, watching it go from floor to floor. Well, finally, I couldn't take it any longer, so I bribed the operator with some of the money that Dunn had given me to give me a chance to operate it. Well, I was on the 3rd floor with the doors wide open, taking it to the 4th floor, rubbernecking up and down the hall. Within a few seconds, my career, in fact, almost my life, ended when one of the older players yelled out, "Get your dang fool head in, kid!" And I did. Well, just in time. Well, when Dunn found out, he chewed the stuffings out of me. And what he didn't say, the older players said for him. Well, one of them finally said, well, you're just a babe in the woods. Well, after that, they called me Babe. Well, that year, Baltimore, in the International League, even though we were in first place, was having a hard time drawing a crowd because the Terrapins of the new Federal League were doing really well at the box office. So in June, Dunn had to start selling off some of his players. He sold Jack Egan and myself to the Boston Red Sox. Well, when I got to the Red Sox, I guess they had heard that I was kind of a wise guy and didn't have any respect for older players. Well, that wasn't true. You see, it's just that I wanted them to understand that I was as good as any other pitcher on the Red Sox. The one thing they didn't like the most was the fact that I insisted upon taking batting practice. Well, one day I came to the ballpark and found that all my bats had been sawed in two. Well, other than that, we got along all right. But that first go-around with the Red Sox, I only lasted a month. I pitched in 3 games, winning 2 of them. One of my first victories came against the Cleveland Indians. They got 5 hits off of me, and we beat them 4-2. Joe Jackson, that great hitter, got 2 of the hits. Well, I think that if Joe Jackson hadn't got himself in the doghouse, he'd have gone down as one of the greatest hitters of all time. Well, that ends my time with the Red Sox, because after a month, they sent me down to the minor leagues, the International League, where I pitched for Providence.
Okay. We're back with Babe Ruth, the Sultan of SWAT. Mr. Ruth, I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to be here with us.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Is it okay if I call you Babe?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. You know, you mentioned in your monologue that you had, I think you joined the big leagues with the Boston Red Sox, and then you went to Providence. You're wearing the uniform of a New York Yankee. Would you tell us a little bit about your time with the Yankees?
Well, yeah, that's probably one of my most famous years, even though I had some great years when I was with Boston. But I was traded December 1919, I actually traded, but I was sold to the New York Yankees and spent 14 years with them, which we won 10 pennants and 7 World Series. That was the beginning of what they call the Yankee dynasty, actually.
Did you play in Yankee Stadium at that time?
Played, actually, I am honored to say that when the stadium was built in 1923, it was referred to as the house that Ruth built.
And why do they refer to it as that?
Because of the money that they were able to generate after I became a Yankee. At that time, we had played in the Polo Grounds, the New York Giants home golf field. And when they were on the road, the Yankees would come in and play. But the Giants started getting envious because we were drawing well over 1 million people and they weren't. So they asked us to leave. So the owners of the Yankees took the money that they would get from the audiences that would come and see the Yankees play, featuring Babe Ruth, and took that money and invested it wisely and built Yankee Stadium, the first ballpark to be called a stadium.
During your time with the Yankees, how many positions did you play?
Well, I pitched some for the Yankees. I played left field for the Yankees and played right field for the Yankees. And until that young fellow Garrett came along, I played a little first base.
What do you have a favorite position that you like to play?
Well, actually, my favorite position is first base because you're part of the action all the time when you're at first base. Now in the outfield, you're kind of lonely. You're out there, you're way far away from the batters. So, you know, well, it did give me an opportunity on several occasions to talk to the fans around the outfield. In between innings, I'd just go over and maybe, you know, sit in the first or second row of the box seats in the outfield or in the bleachers and talk to a few of the fans. But basically, first base was more exciting, more things going on.
Well, you're certainly known as a prolific hitter and a long ball hitter. Were there any pitchers that gave you any particular trouble or that you found harder to hit than others?
Well, I'd have to say there was this little left-handed pitcher from the old St. Louis Browns, Hubert Shucks Pruitt. Now, he was about 5'10", didn't throw the ball hard enough to break a pane of glass. We had a little screwball. In the first 12 times I faced that rascal, he struck me out 10. And I think I faced him about 34 times in my career and only got 4 hits. 2 of them were home runs. But, yeah, he had my number pretty good. Matter of fact, years after he retired, he became a doctor because he was going to school all the time he was pitching in the majors. And he thanked me and said that if it hadn't been for me, that nobody would have heard of him and he wouldn't be able to hang in the big leagues that long. And I got to thinking that, you know, if all the pitchers had as much luck against me as Shucks Pruitt did, then nobody probably would have heard of me.
Yeah, well, certainly everyone has heard of you.
Well, yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
You know, you go by several nicknames. Are those okay? Is that okay with you? Do you mind being known as the
I don't
Sultan
mind at
Swat
all.
or
No, the Bambino, the Sultan Swat. There are a few that are a little off color that I don't really appreciate most of the time, but yeah.
Well, we
the
won't
Sultan
use
Swat's one of my favorites, actually.
As your in your playing days, Ty Cobb was a contemporary of yours, I believe. And what was your? How did you find Ty Cobb? Did you guys?
Well, I found Ty Cobb to be the meanest. Well, I guess I really can't say that while I'm doing that, but. Yeah, Cobb wasn't the friendliest of ball players. He'd fight anybody, anytime, anywhere, at the drop of a hat. He and I even got in a few scuffles during the ball games. But after we retired, now, you know, Ty and I actually got together and we started playing a little golf. So, but he was probably the least likable ball player I ever played against.
Have you ever been suspended?
Yeah, it was a few times. Now, I got suspended for punching an umpire one time, but the longest suspension I ever had, it was for 39 days after the 1921 World Series. In those days, Judge Landis had just come aboard after the big Black Sox scandal in 1919, and he was trying to save the game. Well, at that time, they had a rule that they didn't use really very much, that you couldn't barnstorm. And what I mean by barnstorming is you couldn't travel the country. If your team played in the World Series, you as an individual player couldn't go around the country and play other teams. Well, heck, I was making money. I would make as much in the barnstorming tours as I would making a whole season playing baseball for the Yankees or even for the Red Sox. So Landis invoked this clause, and I was suspended for 39 days. Cost me a lot of money.
Did you ever get a chance to manage a major league team?
Well, that's probably the saddest thing about my career, is that something I always wanted to do was manage. I was offered a job by the Detroit Tigers, but it was just at the time that I was leaving the country to go to Hawaii, and I didn't want to jump on it because I didn't know what my future was going to be. And when I got back, they'd already given the job to Mickey Cochran. So.
Well, at this time, I'd like to welcome to the show the presenter of Babe Ruth. This is actually Gene Worthington of Fayetteville. Gene, thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Gene is one of our experienced History Live presenters, having portrayed several different characters for us in the past, so we're glad to have you back on the roster.
Well, thank you.
As the Babe. So I wanted to ask you, obviously, a couple of quick questions here about the Babe. How long did he play in the league?
Well, in the big leagues, he played from about 1914 to about 1935. I guess it was June of 35 when he played for the Boston Braves and retired. It was in June. Yeah, it was in June. It was about a week after he hit 3 home runs in one game at Forbes Field in Pittsburgh. It was one of the the longest home run recorded at Forbes Field, which has now been torn down.
Did he ever play in West Virginia?
He played in West Virginia in 1932 against the Wheeling Stogies, which they referred to for some reason, and I'm doing more research on it, as the Yankees were the Stogies' big brothers. Now, this is before we had intricate farm systems and everything, so a lot of the players may have gone from the Stogies up to the Yankees. But he even hit a home run here. The Yankees lost 5-4, but
yeah, the Yankees got beat by the Stogies.
Got beat by the Stogies, yeah, 5-4. Yeah.
I've also heard that maybe was it the first home run he hit?
First home run he ever hit was off a fellow named Jack Warhop, who was actually born and hit in West Virginia. And Warhop was part Indian. And
you know who he played for?
Yeah, let's see, he did it. Like, now you got me. He played for the Giants, I know for sure. Okay, and I can't remember who he was playing with when. May have been the White Sox when he was hit the home run. Yeah.
Well, one of the sort of lasting stories, I guess, for the Babe Ruth is the called shot, the famous called shot.
Right, 1932 World Series. Yeah, that's it's an amazing story, and it's just blown up and become one of the great, things of baseball history, actually. And
is it true?
Well, yes and no. He actually did. There is a film of him standing at home plate and pointing out the center field now, or out that way anyhow. It doesn't, he stated in his biography that he was really irritated that, because this time up, he hadn't done anything the first time up, and he hated the Cubs anyhow for lots of reasons and things. But in actuality, he'd already hit a home run that game. Okay, so when he came up and he hit a home run, and they asked him that day in the clubhouse afterwards. The newspaper guy said, "Jim, we saw you wave out there, babe. Did you call that shot?" He said, "Do you think I'm that stupid?" Well, as the story started picking up momentum, he said, well, of course I did. And then, as he went to the end, thinking, saying that yes, he did call it.
The man was no fool.
The man was no fool. No, he was, like I mentioned to you earlier when you were talking. You have to just think of a tremendous athlete. I mean, everybody has this picture of Babe Ruth as John Goodman or William Bendix or somebody, but this guy was a tremendous athlete. And of course, as he got older, older guys, get heavy. Yeah. Okay. And one of the things he did, which was kind of amazing to me, was all the athletes now have personal trainers. Well, in 1925, Ruth was ill for that whole summer, and there's lots of theories on what happened to him: the hot dogs, the beer, just too much nightlife. But he went out and got a personal trainer, and a guy named Artie McGovern, who was a flyweight boxer, and he had his own gym. And Ruth went to this guy and said, "Hey, I'm 30 years old. I'm falling apart. I need help." And during the course of that, from about November until spring training, which was February, Ruth lost 40 pounds and came back and had another 8 or 10 great years.
So what was his, generally speaking, what was his playing weight, say, in his prime?
In his prime, about 210, 215. As he got older, I think he even played up to 230, somewhere around there.
Do you know how tall he was?
Yeah, he was 6'2".
6'2".
Yeah, about my height. Yeah.
So he was big. He was a big.
Oh, he's a big man, especially for that time. You have to remember too.
What were the circumstances around his death? He got out of when he retired in 1930.
Well, his last official was the coach for the Dodgers, was 38, and he died in 1948. He actually died of throat cancer. Okay, there's lots of reasons. He smoked a lot. Back when he was with the Red Sox, he had a sore throat, and they used mercury and coated his throat at that time with it, and they think that may have started it off. I even have a theory. I mean, the guy ate terribly, and I suffered from it, acid reflux. And this is not an official thing. This is Gene Worthington talking, but that'll lead to throat cancer. Acid reflux keep on coming up. He drank a bottle of bicarbonate soda every day. Every day by his locker, the ball boy had a bottle there. So I'm thinking he had a lot of those problems, but it was eventually throat cancer.
Yeah. Well, Gene, I appreciate you being here with us today. This is Gene Worthington of Fayetteville, and thank you for tuning in to History Alive.